I did serve in Lima for a lot of my time. Um, and the thing is with Lima is that it's a huge city. It has over 8 million people. It's also very spread out. Um, and it's not super modern. um, just because of, I think, the economic situation that Peru is in. Um, so there's a lot of sort of suburbs of Lima. It's very spread out. But I did have the opportunity to be in the very center of Lima, near the Capitol building and other state and government buildings, which was a very interesting experience, very different because, there are a lot larger buildings, older buildings, things that have very rich history to the country that have been there for, you know, over hundred years have been there. Since the colonization of Spain, and so it's a very interesting city that has a very rich culture. The weather, for one thing, is very strange. It never rains in Lima. I don't really know exactly how it works, but the Andes Mountains are just right pressed up against it, and then they have the coast. And so what ends up happening is the clouds sort of get stuck on the coast between the Andes Mountains, and then from the east they don't really come over the Andes Mountains because they're so tall. And so their city isn't designed for rain. And I was always thinking, if it ever really truly rains here one day, the city's just going to wash away. It's kind of scary. They get more than rain, they get this mist that kind of just comes down because it's very overcast from living on the coast. And so it's very humid, pretty much year round, unless you kind of get away from the coast and go more inland. But it's very, very humid, and the coldest it gets is probably low 60s, which isn't that bad, but combined with humidity, it's really different. 80, 90% humidity sometimes. So it's this strange combination that I had never experienced, but creates a very kind of interesting and unique environment there, because it'll come in the clouds and everything will just get wet, basically. It won't really rain, but there'll be sort of this mist that just sort of falls, and it's really weird. But yeah, you get a lot of that in the coast and in the inner city of Lima. So that creates for kind of interesting living conditions sometimes. And then as far as transportation goes, mostly the public transportation are buses, taxis. They have other things called combis that are like vans or small buses that act the same way as a bus. And there's so many different routes. It's kind of hard to learn them all, but you get it. You learn which ones are for your area and won't take you outside, and you learn the bus stops. But buses are a huge thing. That's pretty much what most people take. Taxis as well are there, but they're usually more expensive. But they'll definitely get you there quicker. Traffic is nuts in Lima. It's the most insane I've ever seen. I can't believe that they drive just... It would appear without rules, but people have told me, no, there's rules. They're just very subtle, and I don't know. I've watched traffic a lot there. I don't see any rules. People just weave in and out and bump your car, and no big deal. They just keep driving. It's different, and sometimes you're kind of afraid because you're like, okay, we could definitely get hit right now. I hope we don't. And most of the time you don't. And you hear about accidents every once in a while. They do happen, and they're pretty bad. But surprisingly, there's not as many accidents as you would think. So the housing mostly are tall buildings, kind of in the city, that are basically just pressed together. Apartments, 2, 3, sometimes 4-story apartment complexes that are just very packed together. In the inner city where I was in Lima, it was very old. So those buildings have been standing for over 100 years. And some of them you can tell are very deteriorated. And I remember in one part of my area, it didn't happen while I was there, but recently there had been a fire and burnt down this whole area, and it was basically just kind of half standing, and it was just still there. Nobody really cleaned it up. It was just kind of this fallen building. And so the housing is interesting. Especially in there, since there's not a lot of space, there'll be roads, and then there's just lots of buildings and walls along the edges of the roads, and there'll be little doors or gates that kind of go down these alleyways, and then inside the alleyways there'll be doors that go to the apartments, and then sometimes there'll be like a staircase at the other end so you can come back up, and just doors on each side, usually very small, and particularly there, they were just very old. So that made it kind of hard for the people. In other areas, they had newer, but kind of the same structure. Kind of just these squished, tall buildings, apartment complexes. And, that was pretty much the norm. There weren't really houses with, like yards or anything. That didn't really exist. Even in some of the richer areas, it wasn't really that way. They had larger apartments or maybe a whole kind of building that was their house, but they didn't really have anything of a yard or property outside of their house. Everything is built with fences and gates in front of the front door before you get there for safety. So it creates an interesting environment for contacting and knocking doors. No wildlife in Lima, just birds. That's pretty much the only thing around. Safety, basically, just be aware of your surroundings. Just like don't do dumb things, I guess. It's kind of vague, but I feel like most people know, when you're doing something you shouldn't be doing, something bad can happen. The mission and the church provide information for what you should do, to be safe. And it's mostly be obedient and trust in the Lord, and, work your hardest, and things will work out. And, but in particular, I learned, you can usually pick out things that are suspicious, and know that you probably shouldn't go that way. Listen to the Spirit. He'll help you. But crime is a big thing there, apart from just like missionary life, but in general life there, it's huge. I don't want to say anything too negative about the country, but there's a lot of corruption within the police and things along those lines. So it can be very dangerous at times. I never really felt endangered at any point in my mission, except for maybe 1 or 2 times. But it all worked out. And I don't know, it's kind of amazing how that happens. We happened to get stopped, you could say, by a couple of kids in one of my areas, and they were asking us for our cell phone, and I didn't want to give it to them. We knew that if we gave them something, they were just going to rob the rest of the stuff we had, and we kind of just talked our way out of it. Honestly, we told them we were missionaries, and I think the Lord provided some safety for us, and we sort of went on our way. But I think it's really key to just be obedient, and you always have your companion who is, in most cases, is also a native of South America or Central America. So they know usually a little bit better how to deal with certain circumstances and safety. And you learn your area, you learn kind of where the not so great places are and where you shouldn't go after a certain hour. But it all seems to work out so long as you do what's right. But yeah.